I love it. Everyone's ready. The
I
numbers just jumped up.
I know I get so excited too when the numbers start going. I want to say, hello, everybody, welcome back. Can you believe it's another week? Where's our frequent flyers in the chat? Miss you guys already.
Lori, how's the weather been? It's been like really stormy here.
I know it has been here too. I'm in cold weather right now. And so I
Okay.
woke up the other day and it was 28 degrees, which I absolutely love. And for an announcement, everybody knows my story of my cat, right? So we know, if you've been a frequent flyer, that I had a seamstress friend make all my custom shirts. Well, I had a special measuring for my cat's sweater, right? Because I figured the reason she didn't wear the other 6 sweaters I bought, Lauren, was because they didn't fit right. Not that she's a cat and didn't want to wear the sweater, right? Well, she will not wear her custom fitted sweater either. I told her, you wait till it's 19 degrees out. You'll be begging for that sweater. So I guess right now I'm not going to start a new company making custom kitty sweaters because it's not going really well with the prototype. And I think if I was to give my own business advice, if I can't sell it to my own cat, there's chances it's not going to work, right?
Well, you know what they say about your kids, right? They never like act properly when you want them to. So
So guys, Lauren's going to launch us off here, but she's got as you can tell, limited voice. So if suddenly she starts moving her mouth and nothing comes out, you guys that are the regulars that are here every week, you could just fill in the blanks and because you've probably heard this introduction so many times, you can almost rehearse it. Okay. So with that, there's Emma. Good morning, Emma. I know you know this by heart, so we'll have Emma fill in if needed. Lauren, we got a huge show. I got a bunch of announcements, so why don't you kick us off this morning?
okay, perfect. I will do so. Lori, my oldest, turned 15 this weekend. I think that's where my voice went. So it's these
My,
teenagers.
and guys, when she says oldest, that means you have what, 3 kids, right, Lauren?
Yeah, I
Do I get
do.
that right? Sometimes feels like 9, right?
Sometimes feels like a football team.
I can see your show. I can see your slide is what I'm trying to say, Lauren. So have at it.
Okay, perfect. Here we go. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lauren Simpson. I am with the SBDC, or the Small Business Development Center. We're a national program with over 1,000 locations across the country, and we offer no-cost services to local small businesses. They're at no cost to you because your tax dollars have already taken care of our fees. For the Los Angeles network, we represent the Los Angeles, the Santa Barbara, and Ventura counties. Those are the counties we serve. And you can see our physical locations on the map in front of you. Camarillo, we're also in Santa Clarita, all the way over to Laverne, throughout Los Angeles, the South Bay, as well as down into Long Beach. Now, you'll want to get in contact with us because we offer tons of really great resources. Those include no-cost business advising. And so you're able to sit one-on-one via Zoom with one of our business experts. You might even get a guru, like our guru of all numbers, Miss Lori Williams, but you're able to sit down with her as well as other colleagues who specialize in various topics from taxes and finance to marketing. If you're just starting out and looking to create a business plan, or if you are looking to grow and expand and you're looking for, like, let's say, access to capital, we can help you. And then we also offer virtual trainings, much like the show you've joined today. Well, I say much like in terms of the content, but there's nothing else like this show. So please be sure to get in contact with us today and get started. For the Los Angeles area, you can go to or call us at 866-588-7232. Or you can go online, smallbizla.org/new client. For those of you who have reached us and you're outside of the Los Angeles area, Los Angeles, Santa Barbara, or Ventura counties, please be sure to go to americassbdc.org/find your SBDC. Lori, really quickly, I just want to let everyone know to please put your questions into the Q&A. And then for those of you who are, let me check the chat really quick. Please put all of your questions into the Q&A, and then let's reserve the chat for any kind of commentary. A lot of time, our guests want to go and drop some content into the chat, or you all, our participants, want to, have conversations back and forth related to the topic at hand. We invite that. We love that. Also, some feedback. That'd be awesome. And then we'll also leave the chat for any kind of updates and news and links that Lori would like to share with you. With that, I will allow you, Lori, to take it away.
Awesome. Well, good morning, everybody. I just got a few quick announcements, and Lauren will be putting this information into the chat. So one of the things I wanted to talk about this morning real quickly, and probably not a lot of you on the show are needing this information right now, but you can put it in your back pocket to know. Sometimes I get comments during the week or situations where somebody is maybe structured as an LLC and wants to change the legal structure. And California used to have it where you had to pretty much dissolve the one structure and then start another one. Well, just recently, I would say in the last year or so, when I seen them add to it, they're actually allowing you to convert one legal structure to another legal structure. My only purpose for today, make mention of it, give you the link straight to the government website. I always say go straight to the horse's mouth for your information. Don't get it from blogs, etc. So if anybody is wanting to know information about this, you have it. So that's the purpose of that. And I do have a legal structure webinar coming up where if you got questions, we can discuss it more there. I'm keeping the where's my refund in the tips here because I know the minute people file, they might want to know where the refund is. So this is a website at the IRS site you can go to and get the status of your refund. Now, as far as upcoming classes, I have the last of the literacy series for financial literacy coming up this week, Thursday. I also gave Lauren, that's going to put in the chat, my April series. I went ahead and got the dates picked for the April series. And then I mentioned the legal structure webinar that's coming up thanks to Pasadena SBDC on Tuesday, April 4th. And in that, I kind of go over a summary of the different legal structures and talk a bit about how they're each taxed, trying to get rid of some of these myths that go out there that aren't true, especially the one that I keep hearing. I converted from a sole prop and started an LLC for a tax break. Not true. If you don't know why or need to know the answer to that, tune into my webinar and we'll talk about it. Now, upcoming shows, I've got so many that are just going to be fascinating. I'm just giving you a list here. We're going to have conversations about every subject matter possible. I'm starting to get a lot of months booked in ahead of time. So this is just kind of a rundown. For next week, many of you probably remember Barney being on, some of our frequent flyers. At the end of our show, when we talked with Barney, we started talking about the entrepreneurial mindset, got into a really interesting conversation. We're going to pick up on that and take off and run with it. Laura's going to be coming on talking about her company, Southern California Bartending School. And then Simara, it's an HR expert that every time I have her come on, we have a slew of questions we don't get to. So I've asked her to come back on, and then our own famous Deborah Darris, our social media goddess. So we got a lot of really cool things coming up there. Now, let me talk about today's show. I'm pretty excited about this one, as I am about all of them. So in 2001, Robb Dorf founded PureFit, a protein bar company. Fast forward in 2020, Robb sold the company. So during this journey, Robb experienced all kinds of issues with loans, a major recall, a manufacturer going out of business, and even more. So I have asked Robb to come on and tell us his story about his entrepreneurial journey. Robb, thank you so much for coming on the show, and welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for that nice intro.
Well, thank you for being here. So I always have to start with, when anybody tells me anything out of the ordinary, I always throw them off course and start with that. But I'm about to say this, Robb. I have a funny feeling that this is also going to be a preview of what caused you to start the company. I heard by you that you were a long distance runner at Arizona State University, and you ran track and cross country, which I'm always impressed. I get out there with my little sneakers and I run, but but by the time 2 miles comes, I'm like, I'm done now. So tell us about your running, and maybe did that lead to the PureFit company? Where's the story start?
That's actually a great way to introduce. By the way, I do have my Arizona State coffee mug. I don't think you can see it, but many years ago, I did run track and cross country at Arizona State. Studied exercise physiology. It definitely ultimately ended me up right here. So it's interesting that you brought that up as part of the conversation. When I got out of college, I wasn't really sure what I was going to do, and I ultimately was working at a bike and run store. They sold triathlon stuff, bikes and gear and all kinds of stuff. And I met somebody who had a startup nutrition bar company. And because of my background and my sales ability, they brought me into this other company, and we helped grow that company over, I was there over 5 years. That company was sold for quite a bit of money to Twin Labs.
Okay.
But my background in running definitely made the owner of that company interested in my background in physiology and my sales background. But at that point, I had no idea I'd ultimately own my own protein bar company, and ultimately, 20 years later, sell it. But yeah, I think more so just there's a competitive nature of being a distance runner, and there's a competitive nature of being a small business owner. And if you don't have that competitive drive, it could affect the outcome of your business, just like it'll affect the outcome of your race. Nowadays, I don't run much. I'm mostly a cyclist and practice yoga and mountain bike. But yeah, there's definitely all of PureFit had an influence from my background in track and field, for sure. Absolutely.
I'm trying to remember back then, because I'm old, so I have a big memory. But right around 2001, or maybe a few years, wasn't that when the whole craze of protein bars and stuff started? I can remember when it kind of started. It was still kind of in its beginning stage back then, wasn't it?
Yeah, you actually have a very good memory. So I worked for another company from 94 roughly to 99, 98, that once again was sold. And then I went into outdoor advertising. I needed a job, I was getting married, that type of stuff. But you're absolutely right. At that time, the nutrition bar market was just starting to take off. In fact, for the most part, the bars were more like candy bars that had been modified with protein powder. There wasn't a machine back in 1999 that was called a nutrition bar or a protein bar machine. Manufacturers would take candy bar machines, and the ingredients would be more healthy with protein powder, but for the most part, they were modified candy bars. So after I had left the company that was sold, you're absolutely right. I saw the market starting to take off, and my dad was constantly encouraging me to start my own bar, but it took years for me to have the guts and a little bit of money to do so. But you're right, I was fairly early in the game, but I wasn't the first, but I definitely saw that the market was exploding, and it did for quite a bit. It was a good, probably 10, 15 years of consistent growth. And I don't know at what point it started to level off, but that's when my job got very, very hard, obviously, because
what I'd like to do is because everybody's always at that point where it reminds me, once again, going back from being old, that old game where you put the quarter and you're trying to get that little dump truck to push the little prize over the edge, right? That's where I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs, especially in our audience, they're trying to push that over the edge. So I always like to kind of boil down to when you started. So did you go in your kitchen and mix something up in a bowl to get the ingredients? And then when you got the right recipe, in your case, really a recipe, how did you go and get it made by others to mass quantity, multiply it to sell it? I know I brought a whole lot in, but unpack that for us.
Okay, I'll do my best. That's a great question. Roughly around 1999, I was consulting for another nutrition bar company. And I had a gentleman that also wanted to get involved in sports nutrition. And we ended up working an event together and decided, why are we working for these guys? Let's start our own company.
Now that's an entrepreneur's line. I can do this.
It was. And I didn't really know this gentleman, but I had talked to him on the phone, and like I said earlier, I had in the back of my mind wanted to start my own company. I was selling outdoor advertising. I kind of realized that wasn't my my life's, goal or ambition. The gentleman's name was Darren. We ended up having a business breakup a year or so later, but basically back then, we'll call it 2000, 2001, we didn't really know what we wanted out of the PureFit bar, but we knew what we didn't want. And that's really critical.
Yeah.
Most of the bars around 2000, 2001, 2002, as I said earlier, were really modified candy bars. They were, you're literally being made on a candy bar machine, and they add some protein powder like whey protein or whatever. But basically what Darren and I did was we probably did everything wrong, which is probably why I'm on the show. We didn't want hydrogenated oils. We didn't want trans fats. We didn't want sugar alcohols. And we didn't want artificial sweeteners. But no, we did not know how to make a bar. We just kind of knew what the consumer would want and how it needed to perform, because he was an endurance athlete. I was an endurance athlete. We knew the market was exploding. In our case, we went to food scientists up in San Francisco and developed prototype PureFit bars, which then we could take to a manufacturer and say, please make these bars for us. There was a problem, though. Of course, there was a problem. What you can make in a lab, like your kitchen, it's no different. A lab where they make handmade samples is no different than anybody's kitchen, is often much, much harder to replicate in mass. So as we took our handmade recipes and tried to produce them, they didn't really work. They didn't have enough sugar. They just dried out. They didn't go through the equipment smoothly. So eventually what happened was we found a manufacturer to take our formulas or recipes and modify them so the product could be runnable, or what we call extrudable. So it wasn't so much that we were these brilliant food scientists. We just knew what the market needed, and we were smart enough to find the right people to help us bridge that gap. And ultimately, my manufacturer ended up modifying the bar, increasing the sugars, which is not what we wanted, but ultimately it was not at all a problem. And we had a working product, a peanut butter crunch product. And I remember it vividly. We went to, we ran a test batch. I don't remember the size, but they silver wrappers, you wouldn't see them in stores. We took those, we put stickers on them, like Avery stickers. We went to a Thanksgiving Day event, a 5K, and sold, I don't know what it was, maybe 1,000 of them. It was crazy. So we knew we had something at that point. But I don't know if I answered your question. I think I answered your question.
You did. And there's a couple of things that I want to go back and unpack for the audience. I thought was really interesting. So you said so many things interesting, but one of them is many times entrepreneurs think they have to invent and know how to invent certain products rather than just kind of have a clue and then bring in somebody outside to help invent it. And that's what you literally had to do, is you had to go to the manufacturer and say, we want to fill this niche, but you got to help us with a recipe. And I hear that a lot more than maybe many entrepreneurs think. They always think they have a solid plan in order to launch, but a lot of times they have an idea, but they collectively hire or bring somebody on to solidify the idea. And another thing I found fascinating that you spoke of is I also had somebody else who had created some tinctures and skincare, etc. And they got it so close, but they couldn't get it to work manufactured wise, like you speak of. And they eventually had to hire a food person to come in, somebody with flavoring, and they had to kind of take their idea to the next level. So I think it's a little bit of a statement to anybody out there that's kind of got something almost there. Don't hesitate to look out and hire or bring somebody on to modify your original idea to maybe make it more market desirable, that modification. Now, the other thing I love that you said, and one thing, Rob, and I've been seeing this over the last 5 years for some reason, people think they need to launch big. And I'm always saying, launch small, give your time to test the product, understand your audience. Back sometime, a lot of people were going and saying, I'm going to start at a farmer's market or something like that, or the 5K you spoke about, get a feel for it, see if it makes sense, take the next step. Somehow we've gotten this Hollywood entrepreneur where you're supposed to create something and then all of a sudden you need to be everywhere. And I'm like, that first of all, doesn't work. Number two, you don't have the finances for it. And number three, it allows no feedback loop on anything. So I'm really glad that you pointed out how you had gone about it. And that's why I have people talk about it, because it's a reality dose of how things really work.
You hit it right on the nose. Also, I wanted to go back. I remember our manufacturer, when they were having problems with the bar, they're like, why don't we just knock off bar X because we know we can make it? And we said, no, like, we understand that we have to modify and we have to be a little flexible here, but we don't want to be another bar. We want to be the first PureFit bar. We don't want to knock off this bar. You got to remember, we were trying to make a better, healthier product. But you hit it right on the nose. And I too also consult like yourself. And they see Mark Wahlberg pitching a product, and he gets it into 6,000 GNC stores, and they just think that's the norm.
I know.
That's not the norm. The norm is exactly what you said. There are exceptions. There's always exceptions where somebody gets a flyer, where they get lucky. They know somebody, or they have the right product, but for the most part, it takes a long time. And you're absolutely right. We didn't try to go into mass right away. We went into running stores and bike stores and coffee shops, and we really learned how to sell our product, even though we ultimately knew we had to be in mass. And when I say mass with protein bars, you're talking the Kroger's, which owns a lot of stores, the Albertsons, the Whole Foods, the Targets of the world, Costco. But that happened years later. And if you built that into our business plan early on, we probably would have failed miserably, because it's not realistic. No buyer is going to pick up the PureFit bar that no one's heard of and say, yeah, we're going to roll you into 500 stores. It happens, but it's rare. It's rare. So that you bring up a really good point. I really, really stress that.
Well, and what's really interesting now, and one thing on that too, is I tell people a lot of times, if you create a company and you just sell a small quantity and it gives you a great lifestyle, that's success and happiness. There's no statement in business that you got to come here and be the greatest thing since sliced bread. Now, I know I want Oprah to call and everything. We talk about that, but I'm okay with small biz talk. I'm good time. But Rob, here's where I want to go next. So as you spoke about years down the road, you did get into the big retailers. Now, I always like to kind of describe it like this. You're a small business, you go down the road, you're heading here, and then all of a sudden crash, you hit a wall, and you got to kind of go over the wall to get to the other side to start growing into the bigger world, right? So I'm going to be real open so you can pick out what to tell. Tell us about the hitting of the wall and then stepping over the wall and starting to get in with the bigger players, and what happened? How did that come about? Give us that fascinating tale.
Yeah, I would say it's actually fascinating, because if you looked at our business plan, we were intimidated by the mass. We were literally afraid to go to Whole Foods, or because there were major brands in the space at that point. There was Cliff Bar, there was Power Bar. And on the flip side, we realized that our plan of selling the bike stores and running stores and smaller retailers really wasn't allowing us to grow, to keep up with our manufacturing demands. And what we didn't realize was people don't go to bike stores and buy a lot of protein bars or nutrition bars. They maybe grab one or two. But because I was a cyclist and a runner and I understood that market, it was comforting. So basically, I probably struggled 5 or 6 years, mostly part-time, and we haven't talked about the fact that I was still selling advertising and running PureFit on the side. But one of the biggest aha moments, which literally changed the company, was right before the recession, or while the recession, 06, 07, 08, 09 was happening. We found out we were gluten-free. And you have to think about it now. You think, oh, everything's gluten-free and everybody's got a product that's gluten-free, but nobody had a product back then.
It wasn't even talked about that much.
It wasn't. So we had what we considered a sports nutrition bar that had a feature that was more important than any of the features that we thought it had, which was it was gluten-free. So we started investigating this celiac disease and gluten-free. And the bottom line was, we felt like we'd much rather be a big fish in that small market than a super small fish in this big market of protein bars.
Makes sense.
So it took probably 6 months because I wasn't comfortable selling the product to somebody with a medical condition, not knowing if our product was safe. Because back then, once again, there was no test. Nowadays, there's a test. Back then, there was no test. So what we did was we contacted all of our ingredient manufacturers and said, hey, is this ingredient gluten-free? Yes. So the sum of all parts was the product was gluten-free, but once again, we couldn't put it in a machine and test it.
Right.
So we had some celiacs that were like, I know this is gluten-free. I've had no reaction. I'm not having any of the normal reactions. And basically that was the big moment. We started partnering with gluten-free organizations, Celiac Disease Foundation, the Gluten Intolerance Group, and really focusing on accommodating the gluten-free person. Once again, back then, there was hardly any products and these people needed something to eat. At the same time, the grocery stores had the aha moment, we better bring in gluten-free products. And we got our first major order from Kroger Foods, which probably increased our sales so significantly, it was mind-boggling. But it was that switch of saying, okay, you're not going to make it in bike stores. This is your chance to go to mass. You have the right selling point. You have the right product. You know that you can now deliver product, make this work. And that was our first big break. We got into probably 1,000, maybe 1,200 Kroger stores out here in California. I think they're Ralph's, but for your listeners that may be outside the area, Kroger's is number one, number two grocery store chain in the country. So that was the lesson to be learned is we completely saw an opportunity, and it was a much better opportunity than what we thought. And being a sports nutrition bar wasn't different enough. But being the first gluten-free bar, is probably why I'm sitting here, because I don't think we would have made it without at least changing direction. So thank you. That's a great question.
There's two things. I love that. I love that, Rob. There's two things that I really want to bring to the foreground on this. You know, as you talked about the opportunity of the gluten-free market opening up and your product happening to be gluten-free, you know, I am always trying to stress to the audience, the small businesses, everybody I talk with, that a lot of times it's just not the right product in the right place. And it has nothing to do with your own skills, your destiny, because too many small business owners, well, too many humans, us little human species, okay, our human species, we love to beat ourselves up when something doesn't work, and we love to hang on and go, I'm going to make it work, I'm going to make it work, I'm going to make it work, when the best thing for us and our being is to say, let me set this aside and go in another direction, which is so true after the pandemic. So I welcome the opportunity to bring up that the opposite. You spoke of an opportunity that came up by chance, and a lot of times being an entrepreneur and succeeding, whatever we call success, is being in the right place at the right time. It has nothing to do with the actual person. However, my second point, I said there's two, is if you held in your mind, I am a fitness for cyclist and running, and you got that in your mind, and that was a mindset that you were this, you wouldn't have recognized the gluten opportunity. So I think it's a bit about being able to be realistic about what's happening, and then just not associate yourself so much with what you believe yourself to be, and then start looking at what is out there. I think that's a great takeaway. I even see it in my own existence of getting away from being this, I'm a big turnaround CFO consultant, to, well, wait a minute, I really love helping people, and then, you know, being at the SBDC, which has been phenomenal because I can reach so many more people. So I think it's, you know, separating yourself enough from your company and your person so you can see objectively what's going on in the marketplace and where things come in. So I love that story. Thank you for sharing it in the way you did. You know, I want to talk about, as you got into being a bigger company, all of the other things that then come into play. I mentioned them a bit, you know, the loans and this and that. And as I do, I want to just put a little tag onto this, Rob, in case you have a comment on it. I am always, and you may differ on this, so you feel free to differ on what I'm saying. It's just something that I want to tag on if you felt this was true. When you are a small company, I've always been adamant about creating processes internally and writing them down, even if it's just you having a process manual, because what I've seen from doing consulting for 30 years is if people got that opportunity that came and they went and just could grow quickly, if they didn't have the processes internally and they started bringing hires on and all this, it got chaotic, and many times they could not fully take advantage of the processes. So If it makes sense to speak in that context while you speak about the meteoric growth that you took into next, go for it. But keep telling us the story. This is a good one.
Well, yeah. So first of all, that's a lot to unpack there. But
I know.
I love what you brought up, because at some point we did have to take a step back and get organized and say, we did it on an Excel spreadsheet. It's not that technical, but we had to figure out what needed to be done on a daily, a weekly, a monthly, and an annual basis. And that was just the whole process of, and we learned this the hard way. Prior to, there used to be a grocery store called Wild Oats, which I think was bought out by Whole Foods. Well, we got into Wild Oats, and it was a big deal for us. We were all excited, but guess what? I didn't have the staff or the organization to service those stores. So in other words, in retail, you got to call on these stores. You got to ask them how things are doing. You got to see if there's any problems, maybe run some specials. So we learned that we needed customer service, and we needed to call on these stores. So we implemented a system within our contact management system to follow up on stores, but we already lost the account. But the point was, we learned that following up with retailers is as important as getting that retailer in the first place. Once you've sold that retailer, it doesn't stop there. So going back to processes, yes, at some point, and I remember this, we created a process for every task in the company, and then that was assigned to a person. So you could simply go on the spreadsheet, and it could be something as simple as get the mail. Well, you don't think that's important, but if no one's thinking get the mail. So we had processes for everything. And as the company grew, I think especially with production management, those processes became even more technical, but critical. And when I went to sell PureFit, we were organized. Here is the book. If I don't mean to sound morbid, but if something were to happen to me tomorrow, you're fine. Here's the playbook on how to run PureFit. So I do stress not to get overly caught up with processes early on, but know at some point you're spot on. You're going to need to have stuff written down in a simple fashion, because as you hire people, you don't want to make it up as you go. You kind of know this is what you need to learn. You have it written down as a process. And then I would encourage my employees, as the process change, because technology changes, update the process. So if how we get a package out the door has changed because UPS has changed their software, update the process. But yeah, we had a lot of processes. It wasn't the most technical part of our company, but like I said, I didn't know, I ride my bike down mountains, something could happen, and I didn't want the brand to go away because I was irresponsible. So processes became very important, but in our case, they weren't high level technical where the average person could come in and run any part of the job.
Right. So, especially, a lot of people, just like you were doing, they're relying on manufacturers to create something. And a lot of times people think, well, I got somebody to do that. I don't have to have a process. But communicating with the manufacturer, seeing where the shipping is. I see a lot of companies that have holes, and it ends up with inventory not being there and customer service not being there. So let's talk, because I know there was some experiences you had about specifically working with manufacturers. I think you had some bad ones too. So tell us about, how you structured the good, the bad, the ugly, the manufacturer. What did you learn about having manufacturing as part of your business model?
Okay, so this is a great question, because in our case, we had the same manufacturer for 20 years, and that's not ideal. And and there's a reason why. Okay. There weren't a ton of companies making protein bars, believe it or not. When you walked into Sprouts or GNC, most of all the bars are made by a handful of manufacturers with very high minimums. So, we started off ordering 10,000 bars per flavor, then 20,000, then 30,000, then 40,000, then 50,000. But guess what? In order to leave that manufacturer that I had, the next jump was $250,000. So I was stuck with my manufacturer in a bad way, but for the most part, we made it work. But we always knew we had that liability out there. And as you and I consult with clients, we would never tell them to do what I did. Right. We'd say, have a backup manufacturer, have a backup plan, make sure you do, God forbid they have a fire, whatever goes on. So in my case, we had a fairly good relationship with our manufacturer, at least for a long time. Then they got a new CEO and it got much more complicated. In our case, they would increase our minimums, or they would delay our production times, or there would be pricing changes. So the bottom line was, I did everything I could to maintain the best relationship I could with my manufacturer. But it seemed to start to strain the last few years of my ownership of PureFit, and I didn't know what was going on. They basically were having a massive amount of financial problems, and they didn't tell us. So we, for example, had about a 6-week turnaround, which is unbelievable. If I said I need, 100,000 peanut butter crunch bars, I could get them in about 6 weeks, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
This started going 8 to 12 to 14 to 16. So we were having unbelievable inventory management problems. Long story short, we sold the company in February of 2020. And about 6 months later, without any warning, they went out of business. Really put us in it was bad, and they didn't give us any warning. Like I said, we saw some problems. We weren't sure what was going on. We just assumed they were busier, and as a smaller brand, they were pushing us out. But the reality was the suppliers weren't sending them ingredients because they weren't paying their bills.
Gotcha.
So it's quite a story, because ultimately, prior to me leaving, we did switch manufacturers, and it wasn't smooth, and it wasn't good, and it didn't work out with the new owner. And I'm under the impression now that they've switched manufacturers again. So it's critical that you have a solid manufacturer, a great relationship with your manufacturer. But if you can have a backup manufacturer, you have to figure that out. And maybe an example would be, you run your top flavors, in my case, with your main manufacturer, but you run a couple of slower flavors with a backup manufacturer, so you do not have all your eggs in one basket. That going out of business that happened after I sold PureFit would have put me out of business had I still owned the company. And once again, I didn't have another manufacturer that I could easily switch to. So on paper, like, well, Rob, why would you put on? I didn't have a choice. But when all that stuff hit the fan, it was bad. It was really bad, because next thing I know, I wasn't talking to the CEO. I was talking to a person who was put in charge by the bank or something. So and ultimately in the end too, we had to change the product, and the final product is not as good as the product I had when I owned the company, and I'm not happy with what happened in the end. But yeah, it's a long answer, but I hope it's a lesson.
It's a great one, Rob.
Lesson.
You hit exactly what we're talking about. And I always say, look at the key vulnerabilities in the business and identify what they are, and, respond accordingly. Couple comments on that. First of all, your story, I've heard many times where suddenly a manufacturer has gone out of business. One of the things I always like to say to people, and this is the Loriism that's always watching to what's happening and more skeptical, is everything has a little bit of a clue. I had this one company that was telling me, well, they're giving me this, or they're doing this, or they're not paying. I go, when you start seeing changes, something's going on. It's the iceberg. What's below is really huge compared to the little tip. And I always tell people that when you start seeing a clue, start making a backup plan. And so many times people go, oh no, we got a good relationship and everything. Well, that could be true, but the relationship's not going to stand up if they just can't produce at the end of the day, And I would always tell people, we, from being a banker at one time, we always looked at concentration of receivables, which is the other side. Like if you've got just one or two clients, two customers, whatever you want to call them, making up a great percentage of your revenue, you want to start, looking for other eggs in your basket as you speak. And I always say, if you've got a situation where you only have one manufacturer, or you only have one concentration of receivables, one client, you can't change it. You monitor it like a hawk, and you watch it, almost looking to see if the water has a ripple coming in it, and you start getting a backup plan. So I loved what you said about that. That is so true. So now let's walk into another challenging situation for people, and that is borrowing money, Rob. So first of all, everybody likes to believe, and we'll get there as we talk about selling the company. This is the thing, and I'm sure you hear it too, and I'm going to mimic some of the things I hear. I have this idea, I'm going to start my company, and I don't have any money, but I'm going to get investors, and they're going to invest in it because my idea is so great. That doesn't happen, right? So we're going to get some reality that you didn't have a bunch of people flooding you when you were just doing the 5K, and then eventually you had to go for money, I'm assuming. So why don't you tell us some stories around that famous thing called capital.
Well, I got some crazy stories. First of all, I mean, I got a couple of crazy stories. So as I told you guys, we got into Kroger's, probably grew the business 50%, and I didn't have the cash flow to buy the bars necessary to sell to Kroger's. And we're hitting a recession. So, and some of this is a little foggy. So if I may screw up a little bit, but basically, I remember my CPA telling me nobody's going to give you a loan, and I'm like, what do you mean? I've got great credit. I pay my bills. I've got receivables. I've got all this, because no one's going to give you a loan. And I'm sure I went to my parents and begged them for some money, and I think they told me no. But because I don't come from deep pockets, and I'll get to that later, because my mom and my stepdad did end up helping me out many years later, and it was very, very sweet of them, because it was a different scenario, but I needed money. But yeah, eventually I did something that I'm not going to recommend, Lori, but I did it because it worked, and it might work, but I don't recommend it. I actually took money out of my home. My wife was trusting of my ability. She let me borrow money on my home, and back then it was, you would make a phone call and they'd give you and I remember like it was yesterday. It was like $118,000 or some weird number, and I used it instantly. But that was a band-aid. Ultimately, I had to get an SBA loan, and eventually I did get an SBA loan, and it wasn't easy. Same thing. The SBA believed in. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Before I want to talk about the getting money out of your home, because I think that's really an important part. I love what you just said. So yes, a lot of people do take the home equity, and whereas one can say, okay, maybe not the best, and I'm sure your wife was, a little bit shaky on it. I want to point out something, Rob. It wasn't, and me being a banker and everything, so I come from a finance. Yes, it is a push. You're going into your home, but the thing I want the audience to understand is you basically had a purchase order. You were using the money to buy inventory for an already existing sale. And I just had a conversation with somebody the other day that was like, oh, we got this big order and everything, and they were all excited about it. I said, well, if you have it, you can use PO financing to get the inventory. They go, well, this is what they're going to buy. There's a difference between what I believe they're going to buy and what I know they're going to buy. And you kind of had a pretty good risk pool on that. So I love that we talked about it. We talked about where money comes from. We talked about the fact you always should be nervous when you're taking money out of your home or your kid's college education, but still you had a fundamental that made it make a little bit more sense. So I didn't want to derail you from going to the SBA loan concept next, but I thought that was so important to unpack, that you did have a little bit of traction to justify the scary part of taking it from your home.
Yeah, I mean, there was, like I said, if you look back at the failed businesses from people that pulled equity out of their house in the mid 2000s, it didn't work out for most. And many of those were our customers, because by that time we were selling to a lot of independent coffee shops. And you're right, a fair bit of that money was used to finance, purchase orders. Did I perfectly use it for the right things? I'm sure we spent money on marketing and operations and things. The other thing that was unique about my business was my manufacturer allowed me to pay my purchase orders with a credit card. So not only did I get another 30 to 45 days, I got massive points for travel for the business. So it's funny. I was juggling all of these expenses. I had my we called it the HELOC. Eventually, I had my SBA loan, but I also had pretty high balances on credit cards, which is the constant, And it turned out being really, really good, and it worked out until my manufacturer said no more credit cards. and that was late in the relationship, and that did cause some problems. But yeah, I think you don't want to borrow. Your home is good money, and in my case, I made it work. But if I had failed, it would have been a really bad fail. And when I consult like you, I don't want people taking money out of their homes. There's other ways, but it was too easy money back then. Literally, it was a phone call. And my wife was great. She trusted me, and I made it work. But it could have gone the other way. It could have gone the other way. There's a lot of stories that won't be told on this, this event here. But There were many times I could have gone out of business and I'd still owe that 100 and whatever it was. So paying off that HELOC at some point in my life was a beautiful moment, to be honest with you.
Oh, I can imagine. That's why
Yeah.
I'm always, preaching. I guess you could say the word preaching a bit about knowing your numbers. I'm always, every decision is a financial decision first. And when you take risk, you don't just do it. Well, you got to take a chance. That's that stupid programming that entrepreneurs get fed by the media. You just got to
Yeah.
take it. No,
Yeah.
you make everything a strong financial decision, so you mitigate the risk. It's just like I many in the audience know this, that I was a very aggressive hard climber for years, and rock climber, and I
Yeah.
did things that were extremely dangerous, where if I fell, there was nothing to protect me, I would have died, right? And I would always assess, this is the risk, this is how I mitigate it, I feel confident in my skills to take it, and I will accept the repercussion. And you have to go through that whole process before you jump onto a climb. And I think that can be said of life. Life is risky, but you want to mitigate the risk and have reality, and you want to dig out the emotion and throw it to the side, because the emotion can lead you into going after something because you have it as your dream. And I'm like, your dream is to be able to buy a quart of milk, and that's what your dream is about. You figure out a way to make money to do it. That's the dream. Okay,
Yeah.
so you got the money, you got the loans. And by the way, I got to tell you this, as I'm hearing your story, I think that you're like the lottery ticket. I mean, you get into a bar, gluten phrase comes, you get out in 2020, your manufacturer goes under afterwards. I think you've got some kind of little guides around you, because you know what? Always be doing right about the right thing, and without it really being known what it is. I don't know if you ever felt that way sometimes.
Well, it's funny you say that. It's a little odd because I struggled. I mean, even though we had some big opportunities, such as gluten-free, and by the way, we knew that was going to run out, that the other bar companies were going to eventually figure out. Not all of them, because some use gluten, but we knew that was a 3-year window. But in the end, it's funny you say that, Lori. It took a lot out of me to sit here. So it wasn't all like, hey, we got another victory. There were so many problems, and even getting the company sold was hard. But I am very lucky, because I could have gone out of business. But it depends how you look at it. I wish I'd sold the company for more money, and I'll never probably change that, because I'd spent 20 years of my life building PureFit. But in my case, I was just resilient enough through the problems, and I just was able to hold on long enough to get the company sold, not knowing that COVID was going to hit, and definitely not knowing my manufacturer was going to go out of business. So in that case, I'm very lucky. I'm absolutely very lucky.
Let's go there,
for sure.
Rob. What made you decide to sell it, and what made you decide to sell it then? And then what did you do when you decide to sell it? How did that all happen? Walk us through that story.
Our sales were really flattening out, and domestically in the US, we were struggling. There was a new bar coming out every day. So I'm losing sales domestically. I'm making up for those sales domestically by increasing my exports. But the process of getting into major retailers and losing that retailer, and all the other problems of running a small business, were just taking their toll on me year after year after year. It wasn't fun anymore.
Yeah.
It wasn't fun, and I didn't feel I could get the company up anymore. I just was limited on my skills, my experience, my money, my contacts. And when sales started to dip, I knew it was time to sell. So I sold in 2020. So let's do the math on this. It was, if I recall, it was spring of 2000. God, I want to make sure I get this right. I think it was spring of 2018. I was just done.
Yeah.
I was tired. Yep. I didn't have the fight in me anymore. That's the truth. I just was tired of I had bank problems. We haven't got to all the problems, but the bank was trying to cancel my SBA loan, even though I had paid on it on time 11 years in a row. Every month for over 100 months, they canceled it. So it was like, I can't handle one more landmine. I knew it. I didn't know it was going to be COVID. I didn't know it was going. I just said, whatever happens, I don't have the money or the emotional ability. So to answer your question, I had been reached out by a broker on LinkedIn, and he helped start the process. Ultimately, I found a buyer on my own and sold the company on my own. I'm trying to make sure I get the dates and time. The date, basically, so I sold. I may have had a year off there, Lori. I think I put the company for sale in spring of 19. I had like I said, I had a broker, but I had a buyer right away in June of 9. Make sure I get this right. No, because COVID hit the end of 19, right? So I was right the first time.
COVID, we all get.
The bottom line is, I put the company for sale. I went into escrow right away in summer of 18. I was right with the year. But the buyer, they were horrible. They basically berated me and tried to, devalue the business throughout the whole process. So at the very end, I just told them to go pound sand. I didn't have a backup plan, but I didn't want to sell to them. They were not giving me fair value and they weren't treating me properly. I had then this other contact that I had in my back pocket. And luckily enough, that ended up being the person that bought my company. And I ultimately sold to a major soy manufacturer. I did it on my own. So I hope I answered your question, but the bottom line is I just had enough. And the delay in selling the company was I didn't know what I wanted to do next, which is where I'm at now. So I probably waited a year or two long to sell PureFit. But once I put it for sale, I was all in and it made it work. But once we got the offer from the current owner, it was still 6 months before we closed. That offer came in roughly September of 19. And as you know, we closed in February of 2020. I stayed on a year and a half. I could have stayed longer, but I was done. And he needed fresh management. And I knew I really, really liked the guy I sold to and the company I sold to. And I thought the best thing to do was to let them take over at this point.
You know what I love about what you shared, Rob, and I want to bring this conversation up. And once again, I'm having a lot of the things I'm bringing up because of my experiences on a weekly basis with where entrepreneurs are now emotionally and mentally. Many of them have survived the pandemic barely, and they're at this edge where they're tired, they're trying to hang on, their finances are challenging. And that's the conversations that I'm having. And I'm trying to get people more to back away from the company so they don't have it as part of them and feel they must continue when odds are against them. And so what I love about what you just said, Rob, is I had enough. I was done. And, in my own biography, we're talking back, I know it was when I was 31, because I had this motto, bad English, but you can't been done at 31, right? That was my motto. I'm going to be 60. So that's a bit, major difference, right? Yeah. But I felt like if my company, at the time I was in a different state doing a different thing, I thought if my company failed, I failed. And I was holding so tight, I was harming my own health, my own well-being. And I remember a friend of mine said to me, well, you hate your company. I was like, what? My company, because I wouldn't be honest with myself. So what I love about what you just said, Rob, is you announce to the audience it's okay to have an emotion. I'm tired, I burn out, I've taken it long enough, I tried long enough, I'm ending and I'm going. And I love that you also said, I didn't want to do this. This person wasn't treating me well, it was not working. So there's, we get so caught up, and I am one of the first ones to fault at this. I talk finance, I talk legal, I always get so specific in all of the business that lately I've been trying to wake up and filter in, hey, it's the emotions. Let's talk about the human side of it. And I use SmallBiz Talk to tell people, hey, other people are feeling the same way you are. There is on one side the analytical, legal, financial part, but there's also the emotions that we go through. We're human, and we got to kind of come together with both of them. And sometimes we don't know what we're going to do next. We don't. But if we just keep moving, something comes. I mean, I didn't know what I was going to do next. And here, look where I am now. And hey, Oprah, I'm still out here. I got to keep mentioning that. No, but that is fascinating. So if you we're coming close to the end of time, Rob, any summary that you want to give? I mean, you had a really fascinating journey. You really have.
So
and things that you want to share. And I just want to, in case I forget to come back and say this, thank you so much for sharing so many factual things and also just perspective with our audience and sharing this story. It's been really awesome to hear. But give us some final thoughts and takeaways that you would like to share with us.
That's great. And by the way, congratulations to you too, because this show's been going on a long time, and kudos to you. There's a couple of things I thought about prior to coming on. First of all, your business plan is just a starting point. Have some flexibility. You definitely want to write it. You definitely want to have an idea where you're going, but you need to revisit that. My business plan never said I'm going to be gluten-free. My business plan never said, hey, there's going to be 1,000 protein bars on the market. You're going to have to start exporting. So the point is, be aware of what's going on in the market, in your market, and be flexible enough to be, maybe we should make we should make a change. We should turn direction here, despite what we think. That's a big thing that I was brave enough to say, okay, you know what, bike stores aren't going to work. We're going to go gluten-free. And I would encourage all entrepreneurs to just be more open-minded, because you might have a product or a service that has an application somewhere else. Don't be so closed off that this protein bar has to go into blank. Or, in our case, we went into coffee shops. No one was selling to coffee shops. Well, guess what? So the other thing, my brother used to, PureFit's a 20-year story. And I used to, I'm sure, complain to my brother, one of my brothers, I got a big family. And he always said to me, so funny, Rome wasn't built in a night or in a day. Yeah. And I hate my brother Dave would always say this to me. And to anybody listening, it takes a lot longer than you think it's going to take. And unfortunately, it's going to take more money than you think it's going to take. You really need to be aware of that, and that it takes time. And if you have a solid plan and a solid product, don't give up. But it's not going to happen overnight. I mean, that's the biggest thing. I literally thought I was going to sell my company by age 40 and just sail off into the sunset, live in Laguna. And that's not the case. So that's really it. Be flexible. I wanted to go back and talk a little bit about how it took an emotional toll on me, which is, look, you got to put 100% passion into your own business, but just be flexible and remember that no great business was built overnight, regardless if it's a dog grooming business or it's Uber. Yeah, they all took time. They all took a lot of work. And probably the other thing I would tell you is don't take unnecessary risks. A lot of things I didn't do were the right thing. There were opportunities in retail that would have leveraged my business, maybe sending $250,000 worth of product somewhere. Too much leverage. I didn't take those chances. So if it doesn't feel right and you're not sure you can pull it off, there's nothing wrong with just saying, I'm not ready to do that right now, and revisit it when you are.
That is sound advice, especially it's going to take longer in time and money, and to not overly leverage. I love that. And it's interesting because your story brought up my own back in the day, right? And I can recall that as I was selling all of the things from the office at this garage store, garage sale, right? I was trying to sell the staples and everything. There was this moment, and I want to speak to this. There was this moment I was sitting in my garage in Texas, sweating to death, trying to sell off staples. And I thought to myself, all the time that I had my first company, I'd started at 25, every day I went to bed and every morning I woke up, I did so with a fear that I was going to make some bad mistake and the company was going to close. And then I sat with myself and I said, in the end, I chose to shut it down. And what's really interesting, Rob, is the thing that popped in my thoughts next. I said to myself, what if during that time, I had my first company 5 years, I actually enjoyed myself? What if I wasn't worried all the time? What if I took a day off? What if I enjoyed the journey? What would it have been like? And I remember to this day, what I did is I was selling index cards. We had a bunch of index cards. I wrote on the index card, I will no longer regret the past. I will not fear the future. I will live in the present. present. I taped that index card to my steering wheel because I was going to get in my car and drive from Dallas to LA and start a new life a week later. Of course, I reproduced the same thing and it took me years to figure that out. But anyway, it's the concept. We call it an entrepreneurial journey because it is a journey. And we have to realize when we start it, we don't focus just on the goal to get someplace that society defines as success. It's a journey. That's what makes it exciting. And that's why people tune in to hear the stories they do every week.
You hit it right on the nose. I wish I had enjoyed the journey more, because the destination obviously is I want to sell the company, whatever that might be. The multiple or whatever the number is not important. But if you don't enjoy the journey, and let me tell you something, there were days I didn't enjoy the journey. You really got to be in touch with yourself with that. And that would be one of my regrets. You know, I compromised a lot of vacation and other things to focus on the business. So at some point, you know, and this is not anything new, Lori, are you running the business or is the business running you?
So
and
true.
That's what I say to the other people listening here is don't let it ruin your life. Make it, you know, a part of your life that you enjoy, but then be able to put it down and go be with your family or your hobbies or whatever. And that's probably the biggest lesson. You know, it can really take hold. I mean, PureFit had a lot of tentacles and a lot of things to control. And, you know, it took me a good year to decompress after selling it. It didn't happen like boom. It's a long time of like, wow, what did I just go through? So yeah, I really, really appreciate what you said. And I think that's extremely valuable.
Lauren, we're going to invite you back, but would you put in the chat for us, enjoy the journey? So everybody in the chat sees those last words. And by the way, Rob, we're getting it. You know, I always say there's a party in the chat. We're getting good story. I definitely enjoyed today. Lauren, I am going to use a interesting word for today's show. I'm going to call it beautiful. I think it was just a beautiful conversation. Do you have any voice left, Lauren, to you know, shut us down today? Before I ask, I always say, okay, Lauren, shut us down. I got to say, hey, can you talk? If not, I can shut us down today. How you doing?
I got a little bit left. Rob, so first off, our email introductions were hilarious. And then hearing your story was just even better. It's like icing on the cake. It was such a good show. And hopefully you do have some time to kind of quickly scan the chat because everyone just loves it. They're saying, I definitely enjoyed
I have time, today. But is there anybody that I need to address? Is there any question specific? And no, I know Lori's put, I know you put my contact information, and I think it goes without saying, anybody that wants to follow up with me, have a question, a comment, I'm available and happy to help you out. Really, and I really mean that sincerely. Happy to help you out. So it's been a joy being on the show, and I hope you have me back.
Well, yeah, I definitely will. Chat's going crazy. It's wonderful conversation. Emma, which is our frequent flyer and guru of so many things, says you should write a book. I have to agree, Lauren. Don't you think Rob could write a book? You know,
for sure.
Enjoy the journey. We'll call it Enjoy the Journey. In fact, I said I would, you know, being a climber, I always said I was going to write a book that said everything I learned on the way down. Because on the way up, you're going like this, trying to find the top. You get to the top and you go, oh, right there's the easy pathway down. So I think there's something about getting to the top, seeing the down. And I always say the other thing is, I'll learn from your mistakes. You tell me, I don't have to do all the mistakes on my own. I'm old, man. Yeah. I'm ready to learn from yours now. I've done enough of mine.
Well, Laura, very well said. It brings a lot of pleasure to help a younger entrepreneur avoid some of the mistakes that you and I both made, because we all, look, I hope everybody knows that it wasn't all, you know, roses and bunnies on the way to sitting here. It was a lot of sleepless nights, but I'm glad with the way it worked out. But it's not an easy journey, but it probably beats working for the man. You know,
I agree with you on that. Well, thank you so much for being here, Rob. Thank you to our frequent flyers. Thank you to those who just joined the show today. I look forward to seeing you next week. Lauren, thank you for handling everything. I'm going to have you shut it down. And I want everybody to join us next week for another episode of Small Biz Talk with your host, Lori Williams. Unless Oprah calls me, I will see everybody next week. Thanks again, Rob. Appreciate it. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Rob. Bye, Lori. Hey, everybody, jump over to the chat. You can see contact information. If you scroll all the way up, you'll see a link to our YouTube playlist. I've also included my email address. So if you'd like to get in contact with Rob or with Lori, please shoot me an email. I'll connect you. I also have Rob's information in there too. So again, like Lori said, thank you so much for joining us. We will see you next week. That's Wednesday at 10 a.m. for another episode of Small Biz Talk, solutions for your small business. Take care, everybody. Thanks again, Rob.